Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to make this Ankh Pendant, and it is a great soldering project for a beginner or intermediate. So let's get started. I'm going to show you step by step how it is made. This is possibly going to be the second project in my soldering book that I have coming out. It is a basic learn to solder, like everything I know and that I do and that I've learned and taught myself or discovered, I'm putting into this book, which is kind of like an essential guide to self-soldering. And there will be a few projects in the book. So after you read and learn how to do everything, in the very end I'll have like probably a beginner, an intermediate, and a advanced project. And this is possibly going to be one of the projects. I'm not sure yet, but let's get started. So I'm going to make an Ankh Pendant, which is like an Egyptian cross. What I'm going to do is I want to just sketch out quick like my measurements so I have an idea of how, what size I want to make it, how long of a piece of wire I need to cut. And so I have a pencil and a piece of paper and a basic ruler, and I'm thinking about making this about 1.5 inches long. So here's a 1/2 inch, and if I go up, I'll just like kind of draw this direction just so I have like, it doesn't have to be like perfectly exact, but like that's an idea of like the length that I want my pendant to be. So what I want to do is I need to make a horizontal bar across the center, and I want to measure that, and it should be like maybe just not exactly in the center, but maybe just like a hair up, like a hair higher. All right, I know it might be a little bit light to see. I'll see if I can draw over it a little bit more. So let's say 1.5 inches. I'm gonna go from the 8 to the 9.5. And then about halfway through that is a right above like the, in like 8 3/4 of an inch. And then just like up one of those little 1/8 of an inch, I'm gonna make a mark, okay? So, and I made it a little, overlapped myself a little bit. So I'm going to take that mark as kind of like where my loop is going to be, and the loop, goes up this way. So I'm going to measure out from that now about 3/4 of an inch. All right, so there's my center spot right there. I'm going to kind of line it up to right about here, and I'm just going to kind of sketch to there, okay? And that's pretty good. It's a little crooked, but that's okay. That is like the arm. And then up here, there's the loop. So we're not gonna have a wire here when we're finished. It's gonna be a circle, as you'll see. But this is my guideline of where I want it to be. So I'm just gonna like sketch. Now this is gonna be a piece of wire that has a little bit of a diameter. So it's not just like a line. I have to draw 2 lines to show the wire. So I'm gonna do, this is gonna be like my inner kind of loop right here, right? And it's not perfect. I'm like miss shaky hands when I sketch. But just to get the general idea, it doesn't have to be exact. I'm not right in the center, and that's fine. But this is what I meant about like, it has dimension. This is a piece of wire. It's gonna be maybe between 14 to 16 gauge. I'm not sure exactly which gauge I'm gonna do yet. And then here's where the bottom piece of wire is gonna come down, and maybe like even to like, maybe like kind of like a rounded end or like a point. And then it's the same for this side too. And then we can like erase this, right? Because that's what our Ankh is gonna look like. And then the same with this. This is gonna be like a wire bar as well. So it's gonna have a little bit of width to it, a little bit of thickness to it. So there's the general size of our Ankh. So let's look at our wire. Now, you have different options. You can use copper wire, you can use silver wire, you can use sterling silver if you want. Silver plated, nothing coated with plastic or anything like that, obviously. But let's see what I have. Handy on my workbench, I have 14 gauge copper wire. This is a little bit on the heavy side. It's a little thick, so I'm not too sure if we want to use that. And then I do have 16 gauge copper wire as well, which is a little bit lighter. Maybe I'll do this one with that because it might be a little bit easier to manage than the 14 gauge, which is a heavier wire. All right, so after I sketched the entire thing out, I remembered how I wanted to put this together. And like when I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna make something, I'm doing like these rough sketches, and like, here's like what I started with. I know it's kind of funny, right? So I'm like, how do I do it? Like, should I do one long piece of wire and then like bend it over and then add the sides? Or should I do like one? And I figured that's gonna be like misshapen and weird when you go to try to bend that loop and then make this straight. So I thought, well, let's do 3 pieces of wire, right? One for the bottom, one for the bar, and then one for the loop. So that's what we're gonna do. And since I have this drawn out and I know like my measurements, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just figure out what lengths I need, like how, you know, long of a piece of wire I need to cut for each of those. And the way I'm gonna do that is I am just going to figure that bottom, since the entire thing is around 1.5 inches, that bottom is going to be under 1 inch. So like this area right here is gonna be like 7/8 of an inch. So yeah, so if I measure this from like here to here, we're just about under 1 inch. So I'm gonna say 7/8 of an inch for this. And then for this loop, I have to kind of figure, well, I don't know how long that's gonna be. I'm sure there's a mathematical way you can figure that out. I'm just gonna make that a long piece. So we're gonna go with about, let's measure. So we're looking at under 1 inch, so that's at least 2 inches. So let's go with like a 2-inch piece of wire and then cut it down. What I'll do is I'm just gonna hold it up to my ruler and I'm going to make some cuts. So the first piece on the bottom, we want like 7/8 of an inch. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger, just so we have a little bit of weight, you know, a little extra leeway, like a waist that we can cut off if we need to. And then we need another 7/8 of an inch, and there's like a 1 inch mark if I'm looking from like there to there. So I'm just gonna mark it like right here. And then for the top part, we want like a good 2 inches. So I'm just gonna go like here with that. And then I'm gonna take my wire cutting pliers and I'm gonna cut off these pieces of wire. So, you know, the jaws of these, they come into like a V shape, right? Like this, you can see that. Like, so when you put them together, it's like concave and then like this side is flat. So with the way this blade is, when you cut the wire with the flat side facing, I'll show you, like that. Once you snip that, you're gonna have a flat edge there, and then this end is gonna be pointy. So you always wanna make sure that you can file these edges off. I kind of sometimes just like to snip over them a little bit and make sure both ends are, oh, I heard that go flying. Make sure both ends are a little bit flat, and then we can always file it later. And then the same with this one. There's my end. Cut off that little sharp nub on the end, save myself some filing time. And then here is our last piece. Okay, so there's our wire. And what we're gonna need to do is we're gonna need to shape that loop. And I also want to make the wire a little bit flattened. I don't want it like a round Ankh. I want it a little bit flattened. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna find an object that I can shape that circular part, that round part. And I'm just gonna use my Sharpie marker, because that seems like that would be a good, I can use like the lid or like kind of the fatter end of the marker. And I'm just gonna hold this, like try to find like where the center is, right? Sorry about my fingernails, I like did a terrible thing. I put an extra coat on and I bumped it, but okay, so I'm gonna try to find like where the center is, and I'm just gonna push it around like this, bending it like this, like in a U shape, okay? And then just kind of pushing those ends together like that, pinching them together. It doesn't have to be perfect. And there's like kind of our makeshift top of our Ankh. And what I want to do is I want to, like I said, I want to like kind of flatten it out just a little bit. I want to give it a little bit of texture. I want to harden the wire and make it a little stiffer. So I'm going to use my bench block. You can get like a rubber pad, or I use just like an old bandana folded up. And let me back up a little bit. And I'm going to place my pieces on here, and I'm going to use my jewelry hammer here on the kind of like the, not the little ball end, but the flatter end. And I'm just gonna hammer this a little bit. I'm not gonna make it like entirely there. That's like nice. And I'm gonna flip it over and try to get the other side. I don't want to whack my hand, that's why I'm not holding it. And then, I mean, I don't know if you can really see too much of a difference there, but there is like some dimension on that. There we go. Okay. And let's see. Go over this one again a little bit. I'm not too happy about it. You don't have to worry about any of the Sharpie marker marks or anything, because guess what? We're just going to solder this. Okay. And then we have our top loop. And instead of cutting that little, you know, end off, I'm going to hammer it first. Because like when we're hammering the metal, we're shaping. The metal's going to like move. It's going to shape. So we don't want to cut it and then have it like be a little bit like misshapen where we might need that little piece on the bottom. If that makes any sense. There, and I'm gonna flip that over just to make it even. Good, perfect. So we can move that out of the way. And I'm gonna shape it with my fingers a little bit. Now these two pieces that we cut, they're just about the same size. One's a little shorter, that one's gonna be for the bar. And I'm now going to take my wire cutting pliers again, and I'm gonna cut off that little bit of excess, a little bit at a time, because I don't want to, you know, have to go back and redo it and cut too much off the first time around. I am pushing this together so it meets as best as I can. I need a little bit more off there. These are getting a little worn out. These are my old ones. So whenever I have like a pair of pliers or a pair of like these wire cutting pliers or these round pliers, and they get like really old, maybe, you know, the jaws, if you cut like a wire that's too hard, you're gonna like nick your jaws, and they're not good for like your regular jewelry making, but they're great for like when you're just like cutting before you're gonna solder. Those little, you know, little nicks that you make, whatever, won't matter because you're gonna solder over that. So there's our top. It's pretty good, right? See if I can get this close for you to see. All right, so there's our top. And then we have a bar that goes across like this, right? And then we have a bar on the bottom, and that's got a little bit of a curve in it that I'm not too happy about. So I'm just gonna take my fingers. Actually, I might have to hold it with my pliers because it's gonna roll around because it's kind of small. And I'm just gonna try to give it a little bit of a straightening out. I think I did it pretty good. And we can always fidget with it more later. Solder is very forgiving. That's one thing that I really like about soldering. You know, if you make a mistake, you can fix it pretty easily. So there's our Ankh, and I think it looks pretty cool. I think the bottom is a little bit too long, so I'm gonna, and you can see where there's, I don't know if you can see, there's like a little bit of the black marker on there yet. So I'm just gonna take that and I'm gonna cut that little bit off right about there. Don't wanna cut too much, don't wanna have to cut a new piece, but that's pretty sweet. All right, so we're ready to solder. So let me get that soldering station set up. I'm gonna use lead-free solder. I have liquid flux that's used for stained glass. I have a disposable brush for applying the flux, and I have my soldering iron. And once again, I always list all of the materials and tools that I use down in the description. So if you wanna try out this project yourself, you can read down there, and if it's something that I have that I can't like find to give you a link, like maybe I'm using like a stone that I bought at like a certain place or I found somewhere, I can like try my best to give you a comparable link to something that you could use in the project. All right, it's time for us to get soldering. I have liquid flux in a old teacup that's broken that I don't obviously use for drinking tea. And then I have a disposable brush to use with my flux. I have some lead-free solder. I have a dish to the side with a couple drops of dish detergent and some room temperature water. And I have my soldering pliers, and I have my soldering iron. Got my sponge back in there for wiping the tip of my iron while I work to remove residue, which is a byproduct of dirt on the byproduct of the soldering process itself and dirt that comes from the metal. The flux is a chemical which removes the oxidation from the metal, and which is, you know, the dirt, and that collects when you're soldering, and that's a byproduct. So use a soldering mat. I have one in my work studio that is a kind of a heavy duty, like a silicone like one. If you're going to use like a micro torch, you need like a brick or something like that. This is a giant wooden thick workbench kind of portable thing that I've been using for years and years and years. You can see it's like really old, and I used this when I made stained glass for years. And for the purpose of making this video, I have like a white, kind of like a decalish paper here, because you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing against something dark. Like I always say, all of the items that I recommend for soldering, the tools and materials are all down below in the description, so check those out. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to tin all of our pieces. So I'm going to dip my brush into the flux, and using my soldering pliers to hold each piece, I am going to apply flux to them. And these are little tricky pieces. You can also just take your pieces and just toss them into your flux and just give them a stir, and they're fine. They're coated then. So you're gonna one by one pick them out. See if I can get a good grip on this guy. Here it is. And I am just using a regular 100-watt soldering iron that looks like this. It's like a pencil style one. And you can see it's just nice and hot now, and the solder that's already on the tip is kind of bubbling. So that's ready to go. And when I put it against my piece, that solder should flow right onto there nice and smooth. And we want to make sure that we get all sides. So you're going to have to do a little acrobatic work, turning your piece upside down, moving it around. You may have to set it down and readjust it a bunch of times. And that is tinning. That's just coating the whole thing. Now I need to do the end that I'm holding it with. So I'm just going to drop it for a second. And it's hot. You don't want to touch it. If I drop it, it's not going to burn a hole through my table onto my floor or anything like that. But it's hot. Yeah. So where I was holding it, I'm going to reapply some flux because it evaporates as we're working. And just once again, go over that and make sure I have a nice coating on there. Now, if you want, you can take this and you can put this in your dish with the little bit of water and dish detergent, and that'll, clean some of the dirt off it or whatever. But I'm just going to set it to the side and move on to my next piece. I want to make sure that sometimes it's hard under the bright lights to see if I, covered every area. Sometimes I think I do, and I put it all together, and then I scrub it up in my sink and I polish it up, and I'm like, wait a minute, like there's a spot that I missed. So yeah, give it a once over. And we're going to do the same thing with the next piece. Let's do the next bar if I can get it. Got it. And I have solder on this tip already. I haven't even dipped into my solder yet. I haven't even touched the spool of solder that I have at the ready, because I have enough just to cover these little pieces. Again, I'm going to drop it and flip it to the other end. Like I said, if your solder isn't sticking, you want to put more flux on there. And I think I got this one good. I think this is completely coated. If you have any pointy ends, we can file those down later. We can add solder on to smooth them out. All right, that piece is good. So now we're gonna move on to the next one. It's I must have a little bit of solder on the end of my pliers because it's kind of sticking. All right, here's our loop. Let's grab this one firmly. That wasn't firmly. Okay. Once again, I'm just going to take my soldering iron and I'm going to, I hope this is like focused enough for you. Let me try to bring it in a little bit. I have this, I'm using a Banks arm, which is a thing that screws onto my table and has a bendable arm which holds my phone, which is what I record on. I know I need to upgrade and get a camera, but this will do for now, right? So I'm gonna touch this and I'm gonna slowly go over it. You always want to solder in a well-ventilated area. You want to make sure that you have safety glasses on. And now I'm going to, because it's like kind of hard to, I'm going to just try to get as many of like the sides as I can, the way that I'm holding it, before I have to like drop it and flip it over and all that. So we're going to see, I can see I'm kind of running out of solder there. So I'm going to reapply, I'm going to grab it again. I'm going to reapply flux. Let's do that first side where I didn't get that in. And then I'm just going to go over to my roll of solder and I'm just going to hold it up against there and just take a tiny little bit. It's just like a really small amount. If you have too much, it's just going to gloop right through and land on your work surface. And then here's the other side, and I'm gonna make that nice and smooth. This is like a hard to hold shape. And I'm gonna inspect it, and I want to make sure that I get like all inside there. So I'm gonna kind of go around the inside, and like it's not just the bottom of this soldering iron that is hot, it's all sides of my soldering iron are hot. So I can like, I don't know if you saw what I did a second ago. I had it like this way and then I just went like right around, and like it's gonna like just take that solder from the top of the soldering iron tip to the bottom. I mean, it's just gonna coat everything. All right, so I think this looks pretty good. I think it's all coated. So there's our pieces. And like I said, if you like, you can take them and you can put them in there. It'll just cool them down for a second. These are really small pieces, and they cool pretty quickly. So now I'm going to look at my pieces and figure out which goes where. My one is a little bit longer, that's my bottom bar, and I want to see if I need to close up that gap. You can see I have a little bit of an open gap here where that thing, where the ends meet, and I think it's going to be okay. So that's what it's going to look like, pretty awesome. And I want to figure out which piece I want to solder on first, because if you've soldered before, you'll know like you can solder like something together, like two pieces together, and then you have a third piece and you want to solder it somewhere else in the project. If you hold your soldering iron on there too long, it's going to melt apart the part that you already soldered together, because the heat is going to just travel zoop zoop like right through your metal. So you want to just kind of do like a real kind of like, it doesn't have to be super fast, but just like a kind of a quick, gentle kind of a connection. So I want to make sure, I want to do the top part to the bar first, and then I'm going to put this on last, because this is the part that's going to take more like a little more time to connect really well. And I want to make sure that I'm happy that that's open. I think I want to close that up a little bit because I don't like the way that that's sitting. So I'm just gonna take it, and you know, you can wear gloves for this. I had this in the water, so it washed off the flux, but I'm gonna just make it into a nice closed loop. If you can see, nice closed loop. And let's try to get that bar just how we want it. So I did hammer it, so one side might look a little different than the other one. You can be fussy or not. I'm fussy. I'm like a stickler for like little details, and that's why I like doing like the decorative soldering and all the soldering stuff, because it gives me, you know, that's my little what do you call it? That's my little way that I get that out of my system, like you know. There we go. So I'm really happy with the way you can line it up on your sketch too. I mean, like I said, you should use a mat, but if you want to see exactly where to line it up, you can also, even after it's soldered, you can put like a tiny little drop of marker if you want to measure where your center is. Like if you're not sure where the center of that bar is to match, you know, the pieces up, you can take your Sharpie marker and you can put a little dot on there and solder right over it. It's not a big deal. So I have these pieces together. like I coated them with flux. They're gonna come apart a little bit when I put the flux on, so I'm gonna just kind of measure them up again. Now, if you take your soldering iron and you just go on there, the pieces are gonna go all different directions, and you don't want that. So you need to stabilize it somehow, and usually what I'll do is just kind of hold it down with my pliers. So I'm gonna actually turn this in a way, because this kind of bench that I'm working on has a lip. You can't see it, but like if I dropped something, like let's say I dropped a ball of solder off my soldering iron, it's not gonna roll on my lap. I have a 2-inch lip on this thing. And I'm going to try to kind of hold both pieces together. And it just takes a minute of a little bit of finagling, or maybe even just the one against the other, and just give it a little drop there. Didn't move very much, it looks good. And I'm gonna flip it over and I'm gonna do my contact again on the other side, because you wanna make sure that you've got a really good joint of solder on there. You want a good connection that's really strong. So let's take this and just kind of hold it a little bit, and I'm just gonna just tap it, and it's melted nicely on there. A little bit more. You don't want to flood too much solder on there. You don't want to make it look like, oh, there's a big giant glob there, unless that's the look you're going for. All right, I'm happy with that. So now we're gonna put our last piece on. And I'm gonna go over this because I see I have a pointy end of solder on there. Okay. Sometimes because I don't, touch things really with my hands, I use the pliers. I'm right-handed, but I always use the pliers in my left hand because I'm always soldering with my right hand. It's just kind of how I've evolved. I've learned how to do that. And so when I'm moving pieces, a lot of times I'll just use my flux brush to like toss things around like this and hold things into place. And so let's figure out where we want that. And I can see that still has a little bend in that wire that I'm like, when it goes to one side, that I don't like. Let's turn it this way. And we want it to look nice. We don't want to have that kink in there. I may have to straighten that out a little bit. Let's see. I can roll it over, I can't. Okay, let me wash that off quick. All right, and I'm gonna actually just use my fingers and just kind of try to get that little bend out of there. I think I did it. Pretty good. No, maybe not. Oh, I can see a spot where I didn't coat it with solder. Wow, see, it's just what I meant before. Didn't have enough on my soldering iron. All right. Try to get this so it's looking good. And if I get it like kinked and I can't get it out right and I'm just not happy, I'll just cut another piece of wire. It's not an issue. It's a non-issue. Okay. I want to make sure I get that nice and coated with flux. Get this right where I want it. And like that. I'm gonna line it up right at the point where that center is, where those two ends meet. And then once again, I'm gonna take my soldering iron, have a little, make sure you have some solder on there. Don't need tons. And I'm gonna just kind of hold this down, and I'm gonna touch the tip of my soldering iron to the joint that I already made, and I'm gonna let the solder flow from the tip of my iron and some of the solder that I have there, so it all kind of goes together. Here we go, you ready? In there, it's got a little cool because it took me a minute. All right, so there's our joint. I'll flip it over. All right, so I think I have a little bit too much length on the bottom, so I'm just going to use my wire cutting or my side cutting pliers, and I'm just going to eyeball it and take a little bit off. You don't want to take too much off. I think I'm really happy with that. And then where I cut it, again, I'm gonna go over that with a little bit of solder, which is just going over the bottom. And then we'll add some decorative soldering if we want to put some dots on it or whatever. So that's our basic Ankh. It's all put together. And I'm gonna kind of smooth it out now, make it look a little nicer. I'm gonna put a little bit more solder on it to give it a little bit more dimension. Like I want it a little heavier at the top. I want the top to look a little bit thicker. So I'm going to put some flux on it again, as I just did, and I'm gonna take some solder And I'm not gonna hold my iron on there like super duper long, like I said, because I don't want the whole thing to come apart. And if it does, just take a break for a moment, take a deep breath, and then get back to it and put it back together, because it happens to me too. I mean, it happens to everybody, right? So this metal is already cooled down from when I worked before, so it takes a second. It's not just gonna like melt right on there, but I picked up another, like a nice piece of solder, like the size of like a grain of rice, and I'm just gonna kind of put that on. See how it made that like, and I'm just gonna like tap it a little bit because I don't wanna hold that on there too long, but I also want it to look kind of even. So I'm gonna get the heaviest part at the top. There we go. Sometimes if you fuss with it too much, it'll start to get messy. It'll start to mess up. So, you know, I had it down against my work surface, so it's gonna be kind of flat on the other side a little bit. That's cool. I'm happy with that. Looks good. All right. So what I'm gonna do, because I still mess with it, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wash this off, and then we are going to give it another 1, 2, 3 with that ball peen hammer. And you know what? I'm just gonna give it a little bit more solder there. I'm happy with that. Good. We don't want like a big glob anywhere. I want to kind of make it like it's, you know, pretty even. All right, so I washed my Ankh. I have some extra solder that I put at the top, and then on the other side there's kind of like a little bump there. And the first thing that you can do, the first technique I'm going to show you is just to kind of, you know, hammer down that solder a little bit. You don't want to like really hammer it too much at the joints. You want to be careful. I'm just kind of flattening it out, and it's going to give it like a shiny look. And this is the first of 2 things I'm going to show you. Now, the more you hammer metal, it gets, you know, more brittle. I don't know why my hands look so red in this light, but so there's one. Give it a little bit, and you can, you know, hammer the wire again a little bit. Like I said, you don't want to overdo it. Just be careful a little bit. You don't want to misshape it. This one, I wonder if I could kind of straighten that out a little bit. So there's one thing that you can do, right? And it's still kind of in a little bit. So the next thing I'm going to show you is soldering. So I'm going to pull back down this so you can see what I'm doing, because it's easier for you to see than it is to you to see on there, I think. But I'm gonna, once again, I'm gonna coat this with flux. So if you have a textured hammer, like a, you know, you can get textured ends for your hammer. You can do that. That's a kind of a cool thing to do. I've seen people even make their own hammers where they kind of carve it out. So it has a texture on the end, and we're gonna use the rubber stamps. Red vulcanized rubber stamps. And if you haven't seen this technique before, it's in my first book, Boho Chic Jewelry, and I also do it in some of my other videos. So if you want more instruction on this, check out my jewelry making playlist. So I'm going to apply some flux on here. And I'm just going to heat it up. And I'm going to be careful that I don't hold my soldering iron on here too long and like melt the pieces apart. And I'm just going to put some texture up here. So I'm going to melt that droplet that I had there, and then I have my rubber stamp in my other hand all ready to go, and I'm going to melt, and then I'm just going to press, and it's going to have like a texture. And I might have to do this a few times. It doesn't always get right the first time. As a matter of fact, I really like to do it on this instead. So let's bring this down and zoom it in. Let's get centered here. All right, here we go. Let's try this other one. I kind of like this one too. So there, that's pretty cool. I like that a lot. All right, so after doing some rubber stamping on there, you can see I have a nice texture, and if you like, you can, put some ends on it. I kind of feel like it needs a little bit of like a drop on the ends, but I don't want to make it like too decorative. So I think I'm just actually going to keep it as it is, and I'm going to go wash it up, and I'm going to run a file over the pointy ends, because once, this was copper wire that I used. So if I file it down, you're going to see the copper through. So I want to make sure that I still have my soldering iron plugged in. I'm going to go wash this off. I'm going to file down the ends, and then we're going to check it and make sure that there's no copper ends sticking through. I have an inexpensive acrylic nail file, and what I'm going to do is I am just going to go over these pointy ends and make sure that they're smooth. I'm not making it into like any kind of particular shape. I'm kind of just smoothing out the corners and making sure there's no really pointy ends sticking out. Nice. It's really pretty. All right, let's polish it up. I have an old rag that already has some polish on it. I don't need to use more. I'll put a link below in the description to what I use if you're interested. And I'm gonna kind of hold it and rub it, but I'm being very careful because like it's not super heavy, thick wire, so I don't want to like bend it again. We don't want to misshape it at all. We want to just kind of just give it a little bit of a polish and make it get some of that like a surface dirt off of there and make it really shiny, really like super shiny. And that is it. All right, so I'm gonna make sure the ends aren't too pokey, that there's nothing like, I mean, they're a little pokey, but there's nothing like really sharp on there. And I'm gonna put a chain through. So to finish off our pendant, all we're gonna do is string on a chain. And I could have added a vintage patina on this and then buffed it out, and that does make the design at the top show up a little bit better, but I really like it in the shiny silver. So all I'm going to do is thread a chain right through the top. It doesn't need any kind of a bail or a jump ring or anything like that, and I'm just gonna close up the clasp. And this is a really fine chain I'm using. It's like 1.5 millimeter or something, and I'm just gonna hang it right like that. And it's so pretty. So before I forget, I just wanted to mention, those of you who purchased Soldered Alchemy, the new version for 2023 is out, and I'll put a link above and below for anyone who's interested. But for those of you who've purchased it, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if you have left me a review or feedback on it, I really appreciate that too. And I just wanted to say thank you, and I hope you had a great holiday, and I hope you're having a great new year, and I hope you like this project. I'm excited to be back making videos again, and I'll be back soon with a new one for you. And I have an art project I want to do as well. Last year I did a couple Valentine projects, so I don't think I'm going to do any Valentine's ones, but you can look in my playlist for crafts for those. But anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I hope you liked this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. And I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.